I really have looked at recently is what is the impact. I mean, right now, just to give you an example, a quarter of the world's population live in countries that are facing extremely high water stress. You know, in South Africa, they almost had to turn off the water because they didn't have any water. So what happens when that goes on? Or to take the other side of it, look at California and what happened as hundreds of thousands of people lost their electricity because they turned it off, because they haven't been keeping the infrastructure up. So that all of this requires just realistic planning to prepare for the projections of what's coming. And I think without that, there's just going to be an awful lot of death and suffering and just an awful lot of misery that could be avoided. You know, when I look at this, I think back to 1973 and the oil embargo, and Jimmy Carter, the only president we've ever had who actually knew about power. He was a trained nuclear engineer. And he was trying to get us started on this conversion. And then Reagan came along, took all the solar panels off the top of the White House and where Carter had put them. If we had started in 73 to begin to make this transition out of carbon energy, the big issue is we have to stop using carbon energy. And so the faster we can do that, the better. But whether we're going to make the commitment and go against these enormous petroleum corporations and the power they have politically, it's not clear.
Well, Stephen Schwartz, let's take a brief station break and we'll be back resuming the conversation with Stephen Schwartz on this Thanksgiving.
It's not the end of the world. We could live it large, 'cause we're only old. Well, they called me once, and they called me twice. The third time they called me was cold as ice. They say, get to the table on time. Better make up your mind if you want to get to the table on time. Better get to the table on time.
Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters, and this is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And we're continuing the conversation on this Thanksgiving with Stephen Schwartz, who's the editor of the daily web publication, the Schwartzreport, which concentrates on trends that will shape the future, an area of research he's been working on since the mid-1960s. And previously, he was the Senior Samueli Fellow in Brain, Mind and Healing at the Samueli Institute and the author of The 8 Laws of Change. And his latest articles at Explorer, the magazine, which is explorejournal.com, are War, Climate Change and Migration, and Water, Healthcare and Destiny. So the IPCC, which you've mentioned, the International Panel on Climate Change report, basically said that we would have to cut carbon emissions by 50% in 12 years to avoid going above 1.5 degrees Celsius and staving off catastrophic floods, droughts, etc. And you're skeptical that can be done.
Well, no, I'm not skeptical that it could be
no,
done.
that it will
I'm
be done.
skeptical that the commitment will be made to do it.
Sure. But then you also, on the positive side, there are more and more electric cars. I noticed, by the way, that Elon Musk of Tesla has come up with a new pickup truck, that extremely futuristic-looking pickup truck. And one of the articles said, well, I'm not sure that contractors are going to show up on a building site with that vehicle. But on the other hand, it might happen. I mean, one of the...
Well, he claims he sold 120. He's already got orders for 125,000 of them.
Right.
I don't know if that's true, but that's what he says.
Yeah, well, it's quite possible. The reason I think it's an important yardstick is that so many, if you go down in the South and in the red states, you see these huge pickup trucks with big wheels and big chimneys that like exhaust pipes on the Queen Mary, and they've got Confederate flags and Trump bumper stickers, and they're celebrating how much CO2 they're pumping into the air. So the idea that you could give those people an alternative seems like a good step forward.
Well, yes, if you would make the national commitment to do it. This is hard stuff to talk about on Thanksgiving when you want everybody to be happy and give thanks and be positive. I understand that, but I also understand that we don't have very much time. There is a lot of science on this although, as I said, it happens faster than you think, and it's worse than you think it's going to be. Nonetheless, we're getting a pretty good picture of what is going to happen. I mean, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration now predicts, as of last March, that there would be a major flood risk along the Missouri, Mississippi, and Red River of the North, and that 200 million people in 25 states are going to face a flood risk. So, you just look at these numbers, and you look at these studies one after another that come up over and over again. I mean, I've done literally hundreds of stories on this, and you think, why hasn't a commission or a study group or a congressional task force or something been created to begin the preparation for this? I don't have an answer for that. It's a lack of political will, an unwillingness to face the reality of it, I guess. But that's what it's going to take. It's going to take establishing some sort of national task force, whatever you want to call it, that is going to draft policy and implement policies that prepare not only us, but for us and those around us, because as anybody will, if you do any research, you'll discover that a lot of the migration that's coming up from the Central and South American states is social instability, yes, but it is also being driven by climate change, because it's becoming more and more difficult for farmers, for instance, to grow their crops. So you've got all of these people that are pouring up right now, and imagine what it's going to be like when it's 20 or 30 or 40 times worse. I mean, that's what you confront. When you look at this, what you see over and over again is that it is predictable what's going to happen. It is possible to figure out what to do about it, but it takes national will, and it takes a national commitment on the part of everyone. And that's why I said to you earlier, everybody's gathering today for Thanksgiving, and I think it would be very useful to take a moment and stop and talk amongst yourselves. And the key to this thing is going to be individual choices. That's how you create social change. And so the question is, every day I make a lot of choices about all kinds of things: the food, the cat's food I buy, the toothpaste I buy, the gasoline I buy, all those little bitty choices that most people don't even think about. And that you make the commitment that from now on, from this Thanksgiving Day forward, every choice that I make, I will always choose the option that is the most compassionate, life-affirming, and fostering of well-being, whatever the decision, and begin to commit to that. That's how Gandhi got independence from India, for India without a war. That's how Martin Luther King made the civil rights movement work. We need to have a change in national consciousness. Each of us as individuals, not looking to the government, but what can I do that will help prepare in your town, in your community. Take 30 minutes and look at the climate change projections for your town, for your little city, whatever, and begin to think about what could I do? How could I become involved? What could I ask my representatives in the city council to do? The problem we have is that people simply will not admit that it's coming. And, of course, if you won't admit that it's coming, you're not going to be prepared.
Well, just in the last couple of minutes, you mentioned the need to mobilize like this country did in World War II, or when the U.S. entered World War II after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. Of course, arguably, we have Pearl Harbors every day in terms of weather event that are telling us that the attack is coming. But that's an abstraction compared to what happened on December 7th, 1941. So is it possible that there'll be a tipping point, that some kind of terrible weather event? What do you think it's going to take to get people into that mindset that's necessary in the way to mobilize the entire country, like what happened after Pearl Harbor?
What will it take? That's a really good question, Ian, because what you would have thought it would have taken was just what has happened, and that would have stirred people up. But, I mean, even in for instance, again, I go back to the Second War. As the Second War was beginning, the world leaders met in London in September of 1941 and created the Inter-Allied Committee on Post-War Requirements, which came to be known as the Leith-Ross Committee. And they began to work. It ultimately became part of the United Nations. But at the time that they were putting this together, that they stated that the purpose was to plan, coordinate, administer, and arrange for measures of relief of victims of war in any area under control of the United Nations by providing food, fuel, clothing, shelter, and other basic necessities and medical and essential services. That's pretty much the statement. And so what would it look like in your city or your state or at the federal level if we would make that commitment? And I think it's going to depend. It's going to matter how we vote in 2020, because the 2020 election is going to set the tone for climate change and how we're going to prepare for it. And if Trump is reelected, then nothing is going to happen.
Well, Stephen Schwartz, go ahead.
I was going to say, you can already look at Puerto Rico or Houston or along the Gulf Coast, and they're still struggling with hurricanes that they had several years ago. So you get a sense of what's going to happen. Plus, as the sea rise goes on, there's going to be an enormous collapse in real estate values that's going to severely destabilize the economy. I mean, the estimates, you're coming out of California. Imagine what the collapse of the Malibu real estate market will have as an effect on Los Angeles, or the collapse of Manhattan Beach or Hermosa Beach, the real estate because of sea rise.
Yeah,
so
Venice will be underwater. So
yes, exactly.
Well, Stephen, let's sort of hope that on this Thanksgiving that people get the message that denial is unacceptable and that there are reasons to be motivated. There's reasons to be hopeful. Things can change. It's not inevitable. But
yes.
And I thank you for joining us on this Thanksgiving.
My pleasure.
And again, I've been speaking with Stephen Schwartz, who's the editor of the daily web publication, The Schwartzreport, which concentrates on trends that will shape the future, an area of research he's been working on since the mid-1960s. Previously, he was the Senior Samueli Fellow in Brain, Mind and Healing at the Samueli Institute. He's the author of The 8 Laws of Change, and his latest articles at the Journal Explorer at explorejournal.com are War, Climate Change and Migration, and Water, Healthcare and Destiny. We're going to take a brief station break. We're back investigating the origins of Thanksgiving and the myths about the interactions between the Pilgrims and the Native Americans.
He said, fear me again.